Hey guys, Pete here. This is going to be a continuation of my Mr. Robot Season 1 rewatch. This is my recap and review for Season 1, Episode 4. Another good episode right on the back end of Episode 3. And I will be continuing going through the rest of the season on the lead up to the Season 3 premiere next week. So the title of this episode is Daemons, which is a pretty interesting concept, and we'll get to that later. But the word daemons is very similar to the word demons, and we see Elliot confront one of his most pressing demons with his morphine addiction after he turned in Fernando Vera, who was Shayla's employer and connection for the drugs that he needs. In this episode, we see Elliot start to go through withdrawal. We see that it affects everything in his life. It seems like he has some experience with it, like he knows what's going to happen, but he's presented with this situation where they have to act fast in order to destroy the tape backups at Steel Mountain before he has time to detox properly. This, of course, leads to some problems, and we'll talk about all of that as we go along here. So I guess one of the things we learn about here more than we have in the past is about the other members of Fsociety. Not concrete details, but we do get a lot more scenes with them. And as viewers, we get a chance to profile them and realize why each person has their strengths that brought them to being in the room at the Coney Island arcade. Of course, these aren't random people. These are people that were brought together for a reason, and we get that idea here that they all have their skills, they all have their personal quirks, or whatever you want to call that, and it's a pretty good episode to build that part of the season up. Romero is in some ways the antithesis of Elliot in this episode because he knows what's going on with Elliot. He knows that he's going through withdrawal, where the others may not have noticed. He has a couple really good lines in this episode, and one of them is, "There's a casualty in every revolution." So we see that Elliot is walking that line of whether he's going to get through this, make this happen, or if he's going to disappear into himself and everything would end. Of course, since it's an episodic television show, we pretty much know he's going to get through it one way or the other. But it is an interesting situation because up to this point, we've pretty much seen him being able to handle anything. He actually says at one point, "I know I broke my own rule. It needs me just as much as I need it. The moment was destined. Every choice bringing me closer to this one line, this last line, I promise." And he's referring to us here, his imaginary friend, and we can feel for him in this situation, but he is definitely a different kind of character when his back's against the wall. As mentioned, Romero knows what's happening. He doesn't really trust Elliot. He says so to Mobley at one point when they're stealing the car. But at the same time, they don't really want to blow up Steel Mountain, so they end up going along with him because it seems like he's pretty much the ringleader here. We've been introduced into this situation with him coming on after the fact, but it starts to come out more clearly here that he's more important, and Mr. Robot says that directly. Again, he emphasizes that Elliot's the only force of nature at play here, which is very telling about the composition of everything that we're seeing as it relates to the Evil Corp hack. So they have an argument about this new plan that Elliot has, but they don't really have any other way around it because of the fact that they find out, because they still have access to Evil Corp's computers, that the backup files will soon be spread out into 5 locations, and basically breaking into one location will be a lot easier than traveling around the country and doing it 5 times. Elliot seems pretty confident in his idea that the people there are the security flaw in a place that's meant to not have any, and he eventually gets everyone to go around with him. We see him do his very last line, as I talked about earlier. We see that paranoia kicks in almost immediately afterwards. There's a shot where he yells at some strangers on the street. Darlene knocks on his door, and he has that feeling that it's the cops coming in to bust him. But as far as we can tell, his plan to put that Raspberry Pi into Steel Mountain is a solid one. The others have small disagreements with the idea, but they all seem to think it'll work if they can pull it off. This means they have to go into the physical location in the Adirondack Mountains in upstate New York. Darlene and Trenton stay behind. They're at Coney Island so that they can communicate back and forth. And Darlene is tasked with making contact with the Dark Army through her contact and setting things up so that they can destroy the Chinese backup at the same time. If they can't do both, it's not worth doing. So they do go. Elliot gets sick almost immediately in the car. From what we've seen, Elliot hasn't done that much. As viewers of the show, we haven't seen him do anything other than leave that server infected. There is some hints that Elliot may be doing more than what we've actually seen on screen. But either way, they do go north. As he's in the car, he starts to really hit the bad point of his withdrawal, and he talks about these ideas of daemons. Those are programs that are within an operating system that perform tasks that don't require anything from, you don't have to do anything to make them do what they do. They don't require interaction or you to type in commands from the keyboard. They're just always in the background doing their things. He says they're always monitoring, logging, so on and so forth. Like a program running in the background silently while we're busy doing other shit. They're always there, always active, he says. This is an interesting term and an interesting process that has a very nice parallel with our own human bodies and how they operate. So this is pretty good writing, I think, here. And I like the fact that daemons and demons are basically the same thing in humanity, you know what I mean? Like, whenever things were going wrong with someone, they were thought to be possessed by demons, when actually we know a lot more in today's world about mental health and different things. So pretty interesting. I like this part of it for sure. Another thing Elliot says is intentions are irrelevant. They don't drive us. Daemons do, and me, I've got more than most. So this makes us really kind of wonder about where Elliot thinks his daemons exist, and at least for me, as I mentioned in my Season 1, Episode 1 recap, we know that he was sent to see Krista, but we don't know why. We know that he has mental health issues, but we don't know what extent they've affected his life. The biggest thing we actually know is that the death of his father is a huge tragedy, a huge trauma that he experienced as a child at around 8 years old. And that is the only fleshed out, even though it's not fleshed out that much, that's really the only fleshed out driving motivation other than his obvious contempt for modern society. So Elliot throws up in the back seat. They have to make a stop. Romero kind of explains what's going to happen. He's not seeming all that helpful, but he's absolutely right. Elliot adds in another symptom, which is hypersensitivity to light. And he drops one more of his little Elliot nuggets there where he tells us, "Don't be mad at me that I slipped. I'm about to change the world." So he has justification for everything that's going down. I would mention that the lines are a little bit more blurred here about what's real and what isn't real. I mean, obviously we launch into this giant dream sequence, which has been fairly important throughout and is still theorized on to what it actually means. But with this talk of daemons, you have to really think about what are his processes that are running that are keeping him from telling us what's actually going on, or for him to actually understand what is actually going on. I mean, does that make sense? I'm not sure. He says at one point, "My subconscious running in the background, making me doubt what I got everyone else to believe." So he's having second thoughts, but at this point he's sick and throwing up and full on the chills and whatever else is going on with him. So the plan is in action because there's no time left. There's a definite connection here with the bugs that he mentioned in the last episode and the daemons. So we'll see how that plays out. As mentioned, this dream sequence turns out to be pretty important as far as bringing up this idea of monsters. So we have demons and we have monsters, and we have a key that continues to pop up in this dream as it carries on. We do see in the Fsociety announcement or video that plays during this sequence, Fsociety promises to exorcise demons. Elliot is obviously thinking about the loss of his father. We see him arrive at his childhood home. There's a 404 message, which is an error message in the lot of his childhood home there. We see his mom force him to eat a bite of QWERTY, who was, his only friend that he tells Angela. We also see Angela eating the fish, and she says it's delicious. He finds the key at one point in Pop's famous Raspberry Pi, which is an obvious reference to the Raspberry Pi that he was going to install in Steel Mountain. And I don't know if there's a great explanation of exactly what happens in this, but the mystery that it creates is very good. I really enjoyed this part. Some of the other stuff that I like less about this series, I think things like this make up for it, and we have more of this to come in the future. And I think what stood out to me most about this dream sequence on this watch, and this is something that people have talked about, certainly, but what stood out to me on this watch this time was that Angela mentions that he's only been born a month ago. Like, we see her say, yes, I will. Like, they're going to get married when he finds the key in the Raspberry Pi. But when they get back when they're alone in the arcade, she says, I just told those people what they wanted to hear. And it does seem, and this is not a spoiler, this isn't something that has come up later that I'm referring to, but it makes it seem like Angela may have more of a part to play in situations as well. She lost a parent just as he did, and although she seems to be like on the outside orbit of things, it's very interesting that, his oldest friend, the one that he met as a child, that she has this other side in this vision. Like, she says, I just told them what they wanted to hear. You're not going to do it, are you? Change the world, figures. You're only born a month ago. You're afraid of your monster. And she says, do you even know what it is? So that seems a lot more like foreshadowing at this time than I ever did in the past. And it kind of gets me pretty hyped up about season 3 because Esmail's been saying that Angela's role is going to become a lot more clear. So there is also a little bit of a tie back there to when she's talking to Shayla, which Shayla is pretty awesome in this episode. We have to acknowledge that for sure. Her and Angela hang out, and she sort of has this like calming effect on everyone all the time. So we can see how she's pretty good for Elliot. She helps Angela by giving her some drugs, I guess you could say. And Angela decides that she's going to go and put the CD into the computer. We see her do that, and now we know the Dark Army has infiltrated Allstate. So that's pretty much everything that happens in the episode. I really like how it started out with him saying, I chose this, I chose all of this. I would say his idea about attacking Steel Mountain sounds plausible for a inexperienced, not knowing anything kind of computer user that has no hacking background. I think that, it makes sense. It's good in that way that we can understand what he's trying to do. He's trying to raise the temperature to melt some tapes. And this idea that people are the security flaw, and we hear Romero mention social engineering, which is something that, as people who don't hack things, kind of figure that that's a big part of how people do what they do. We got a little bit of Dark Army here, but nothing conclusive other than the fact that Cisco is the man that's both the contact for Darlene, but also the man who proposed to her, who she broke up with. She was telling Ellie about it earlier that she just needs to stay away from him for a while and then things will go back to normal. They said Romero had some really funny lines. They were kind of making fun of the movie Hackers when they were watching it on TV, which was pretty good. And, learning more about the Fsociety guys, it makes you wonder if we're going to learn more about them, particularly Darlene. When you're first watching, it seems to me that it gets to, you start to notice that she's more of a main character than the other members might be. So even now, I still wonder what we're going to learn out more about Darlene and how she ended up at the arcade. So she stays a mystery for the most part. And it was I think it was a great episode. I like the mystery of the hallucination or the dream that he had when he was doing his withdrawal. We can see that the plan is going into action at this point, so that's moving along. We didn't have big jumps in the story necessarily, but we did learn a lot, and I am interested to hear what you guys think about it. Let me know in the comments. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Make sure you turn on notifications after that so that you can see my new videos when they come out. We only have a week left at this point, basically, until season 3 starts, so I'll be doing plenty of season 3 videos once that kicks off. Check out my Patreon if you have a chance. I could really use your support. I really enjoy Mr. Robot, but it's not the most popular series in the world like some of the other big TV shows, so any and all support will help to keep these videos coming. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll talk to you soon.